The metal hit the floor with a sharp, metallic clink. Walter Grant didn't flinch, but every head within earshot turned. The cashier, who couldn't be older than 20, smirked, a look of cheap triumph twisting his features. "That cheap little badge doesn't belong here," he said. A middle-aged man nearby stepped in, his voice tight with disapproval.
"You're out of line with an elder."
The smirk didn't falter. Dismissively, the cashier turned his back. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone camera stayed locked on the scene, capturing the torn lapel, the Purple Heart lying on cold tile, the silent tension pressing in on everyone. Hours later, that footage would tear through veteran circles online. Outrage would boil, and one man, someone who understood exactly what that medal meant, would start making his way toward Footworks. When he arrived, nothing in that store would feel the same. It had all begun that morning in Grand Plaza Mall. Sunlight spilled across polished floors as Walter walked in, his worn tweed coat bearing a gleam of deep purple on its lapel, until a stranger's ignorance tried to grind its meaning into the dirt. Walter stood there for a long second, his breath steady but heavy in his chest. The sound of the metal striking the tile still echoed in his ears, though the store had fallen utterly silent. Without a word, he lowered himself down, one knee touching the cool floor. His fingers, thick, weathered, bearing the faint tremor of age, reached for the Purple Heart. He lifted it gently, as if it were made of glass. A small tear in his lapel marked the spot where the pin had been ripped loose. The tear wasn't large, but to Walter it might as well have been a wound. He brushed a thumb across the metal's smooth surface, feeling the familiar ridge of the heart shape beneath the tips of his calloused fingers. Then, with deliberate care, he pinned it back in place. The frayed threads of his jacket stood out around it, a silent testimony to what had just happened. He straightened, met no one's eye, and reached for the pair of shoes he had chosen. But the thought of handing them to the boy at the counter felt like swallowing something sharp. Instead, he set them down, neatly, gently, on the edge of the register. No argument, no raised voice, just a quiet, final decision. He turned on his heel and walked toward the exit. His steps were unhurried, but the weight in them was unmistakable. Every eye in the store seemed to follow him, though no one spoke. Even the pop music from the overhead speakers felt muted, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Walter's mind drifted as he crossed the threshold into the mall concourse, not to the insult he had endured far worse in his life, but to the day that medal was earned. He could smell it first, the acrid bite of cordite, the thick metallic scent of blood in the dust. Iraq, 20 years younger, with knees that didn't ache and hands that could still lift. A man twice his size. The convoy had been hit on the outskirts of a village whose name he never bothered to learn how to pronounce. An IED followed by gunfire. He saw Sergeant Morales pinned down behind the smoking wreck of a Humvee, bleeding from a wound high on his thigh. Walter had run without thinking, just moving, because there was no one else close enough to get to him in time. Bullets had kicked up the dirt around his boots, but he didn't slow until Morales was over his shoulder. By the time they reached cover, Walter's left arm was slick with someone else's blood. The Purple Heart was pinned to his uniform 3 days later in a field hospital. Morales had lived. That was the only part of the ceremony that mattered to him. The memory dissolved as he reached a bench beneath the wide skylight of the Grand Plaza atrium. The sunlight poured in, bright and indifferent, illuminating the steady stream of shoppers moving between stores. Walter lowered himself onto the bench with a slow, careful motion, the old ache in his knees protesting. He took a long breath, exhaling slowly. The metal caught the light on his chest once more, but now the gleam felt different, tinged with the dull edge of the morning's insult. He wondered, not for the first time, how so many could walk through life without understanding what such a piece of metal meant. It wasn't beauty. It wasn't prestige. It was a reminder. A weight you carried long after the battlefield was quiet. And for him, it was a connection to faces and voices that had been swallowed by the years, to friends who never made it home. Shoppers passed him without a second glance. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing to a toy store. A couple laughed quietly as they shared a coffee. The world was moving, oblivious. Walter sat there, letting the noise of the mall wash over him. He had no intention of going back to that store, no appetite for a confrontation. He had learned long ago that shouting rarely changed minds, and some kinds of ignorance were too deep to uproot in a single conversation. But beneath the quiet, a deep, low current of something else stirred in him. Not anger exactly, but something heavier. It was the feeling of seeing a line crossed, a symbol trampled, and knowing the weight of what had just been dismissed. He reached into his coat pocket for a small notepad, flipping it open to the list he had made that morning. Shoes was written at the top, now neatly crossed out, not because he had bought them, but because they no longer mattered. Instead, he sat back, hands resting on his knees, watching the light shift across the marble floor as the hours slipped by. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that what had happened would not vanish into nothing. Someone had been recording. The thought barely flickered through his mind before he pushed it aside. For now, he was content to sit in the sun, the metal warm against his chest, the tear in his lapel, like a scar that would not quite mend. The clip hit the internet before noon. Shot from a bystander's phone, it opened mid-scene. Walter bent over to retrieve the purple heart from the cold tile. No flashy editing, no filters, just raw footage. You could hear the murmur of the mall in the background, the faint squeak of a child's shoes, and then the sharp voice of the cashier. "That cheap little badge doesn't belong here." The camera caught the middle-aged man stepping in, voice tight with disapproval. "You're out of line with an elder." Tyler's dismissive turn of the back filled the frame, followed by Walter quietly setting the shoes down and walking away. The metal gleamed faintly as he left, the torn lapel like a wound on his jacket. The person who uploaded it kept the caption short. "This happened today. Watch. Decide for yourself." Within an hour, the views climbed into the thousands. The link ricocheted across Facebook timelines and veteran subreddits, reposted in community groups with names like Brothers in Arms and For Those Who Served. The comments lit up. "I can't believe what I just saw. That's a Purple Heart. That man bled for this country. Find him, now. This kid needs a lesson in respect, fast." On Reddit, a former Marine wrote, "I don't know this gentleman, but I know that medal. I know what it costs, and I know what it means to have someone treat it like that. It's not just disrespect. It's a gut punch to every man and woman who's ever worn the uniform." Names were thrown around, but nobody could yet identify the man in the tweed coat, until the video found its way into a small private group chat of National Guard reservists. Daniel Grant was in that chat. It came to him as a direct message from a fellow officer. "This is your dad, isn't it?" Daniel clicked the link. The first frame froze on his father's profile. Lined face, stooped shoulders, the Purple Heart pinned over his heart. Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came out. He hit play. He watched the medal fall, heard the voice that dismissed it, saw the way his father turned and walked out, without a word. His jaw tightened. When the clip ended, Daniel sat back in his chair, staring at the dark screen of his phone. The shift in his expression was slow but unmistakable, the faint crease of disbelief flattening into something colder, harder. He tapped his father's number. It rang twice. "Hello?" Walter's voice was even, but Daniel could hear the edge of fatigue in it. "Dad, where was that?" A pause. "Footworks, Grand Plaza." Then, after a beat, "But leave it alone, son. It's just a bad day. Not worth your time." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Are you still nearby?" "I'm sitting in the atrium," Walter said. "Why?" "Stay there," Daniel said, his voice low, deliberate. "Don't go anywhere." "Daniel." "Please, Dad." A beat of silence. "Just wait for me." He ended the call before Walter could argue. Daniel set his phone down, grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. The chatter from the group chat kept popping on his screen, full of outrage and offers to pay that kid a visit. He ignored it. This wasn't about letting anyone else handle it. This was about walking into that store himself, looking the people responsible in the eye, and making sure they understood exactly what they'd done. The drive wouldn't take long, and when he arrived, nothing in that store would feel the same. Daniel arrived in less than an hour. The glass doors of Grand Plaza Mall slid open, and he stepped inside with the kind of presence that drew the eye without a word being spoken. He wore a plain, olive-green army field jacket. Nothing ceremonial, but unmistakably military. The cut of it, the way it sat on his broad shoulders, the clean lines of the stitching, it all spoke of discipline. His gait was steady, unhurried, yet deliberate. Each step landed with purpose, his boots sounding just enough against the polished mall floor to turn a few heads. The set of his jaw was firm, his mouth a straight line, and his eyes, clear, cold, and unblinking, missed nothing. As he approached the Footworks storefront, his gaze swept across the bright displays and racks of sneakers. The chatter of customers and the beat of store music seemed to dull under the weight of his presence. Inside, Daniel's eyes moved slowly from one end of the store to the other. He took in the rows of shoes, the line at the register, the employees moving between customers. Then his gaze found Tyler. The young man was leaning against the counter, chatting idly with another employee. He looked up and froze. The smirk he'd worn so easily in the video was gone. His shoulders drew in slightly, and his eyes dropped to the floor. Daniel didn't walk toward him. He didn't say his name. Instead, he moved to the counter with the kind of controlled calm that made people instinctively get out of the way. "I'd like to speak to the manager," Daniel said, his tone low but edged with authority. The employee beside Tyler blinked and stammered, Yeah, I'll, get him." She hurried into the back. A moment later, the stockroom door opened and the manager stepped out, a man in his 40s with neatly combed hair and a badge that read, Eric. Daniel didn't waste a second. He pulled his phone from his jacket, tapped the screen, and pressed play. The sound of Tyler's voice filled the space. "That cheap little badge doesn't belong here." Heads turned toward the counter. The clip rolled on. The flick of the hand. The metallic clink of the purple heart hitting the floor. Walter bending to pick it up. When it ended, Daniel locked his gaze on Eric and pointed toward Tyler. His voice was low, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "Do you know what that thing your employee just knocked to the ground actually represents?" Eric hesitated, his mouth parting before closing again. His eyes flicked toward Tyler, then back to Daniel, then to the ring of customers now watching in silence. I saw," Eric began, "but I didn't realize." "It's a Purple Heart," Daniel cut in, his tone calm but edged with steel. "It's not jewelry. It's not decoration. It is awarded to service members who have been wounded or killed in action. It is a symbol of blood, spilled in defense of this country. The words hit like hammer blows in the quiet store. Tyler's head dropped lower, his shoulders curling inward. Daniel's gaze never wavered from Eric. That man you saw in the video, my father, earned it in Iraq while pulling another soldier to safety under fire. That medal marks the day he almost didn't come home, and the life that was saved because he refused to leave a man behind? Murmurs rose from the onlookers, low, sharp, and unmistakably disapproving. Eric shifted his weight, his posture tightening under the scrutiny. I'm sorry. I didn't know this happened until now, he said, glancing at Tyler like he might find an explanation there. We respect veterans here. This is not who we are. Daniel let the apology hang in the air. When he spoke, his voice was quieter still, but carried more force. Respect isn't a sign on the wall, Mr. Manager. It's what you do when no one's looking. It's how you train your people to treat others, especially those who've already given more than most ever will. Eric's cheeks reddened under the weight of the customer's eyes. You'll deal with him, Daniel said, tilting his head toward Tyler, and you'll make sure the rest of your staff understands why this can't happen again. Yes, Eric said quickly. Absolutely. We'll address it immediately. I'll also speak to corporate about additional training. Tyler stayed silent, staring at the floor. Daniel glanced at him briefly, then returned his eyes to Eric. I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because my father walked out of this store today with a tear in his jacket, where a symbol of sacrifice used to be. I'm here to make sure no one else does. Eric nodded. Understood. Daniel slipped his phone back into his pocket. Then I'll leave you to it. But when my father walks in here again, and he will, it had better be to a place that knows exactly what that medal means. It will be, Eric said, more firmly this time. Daniel turned toward the entrance. Tell your father, Eric called after him. Tell him we're sorry. Without looking back, Daniel said, Tell him yourself. The front doors of Footworks swung open again, this time to a quieter store. The hum of conversation was low, subdued. The air carried the faint scent of new leather and rubber soles, but the energy inside had shifted. Less casual bustle, more watchful stillness. Walter stepped in. The Purple Heart was back where it belonged, pinned over his heart, its deep purple gleam catching the light from the front windows. But the torn threads in his lapel were still there, a small but undeniable reminder of the morning's insult. He moved slowly, not because of hesitation, but because that was simply his pace now. The murmur in the store dimmed further as people noticed him. A few customers stepped aside without thinking. Others looked away, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of discomfort. From behind the register, an older employee, a man with silver hair and a posture that suggested years of standing on hard retail floors, stepped out from behind the counter. His uniform shirt was neatly pressed, his expression steady. He walked up to Walter and stopped a respectful arm's length away. In his hands was a small, dark green pouch made of sturdy canvas. I can't change what happened here earlier, the man said, his voice low but clear. But I can give you this. He held the pouch out with both hands. Walter took it, feeling the weight, light, but not empty. He loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into his palm. Inside was a small, well-made set of brass pinbacks and clasps, solid and secure. For your medal, the older man said, so it stays exactly where you want it, no matter what. For a moment, Walter just looked at him, his eyes calm, unreadable. Then he gave a single, slow nod. Thank you, he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. The older employee nodded once in return and stepped back. No handshake, no extra words, just a quiet exchange between two men who understood that respect often lived in small, practical gestures. From a few feet away, Daniel had been watching. He stepped closer to his father, his voice dropping so only Walter could hear. "You didn't ask for help," Daniel said quietly. "But honor doesn't get to stay silent." Walter looked at his son, the corners of his eyes creasing slightly. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than his usual guarded expression. "I know," he said. The two of them turned toward the door. As they walked out, the last of the afternoon light poured in through the mall's glass facade, striking the Purple Heart and making it shine. The metal surface caught the gold of the setting sun, a flash of color against the muted tones of Walter's worn jacket. Outside, the mall's noise returned, a blend of footsteps, distant music, and the rumble of conversation. But for the moment, it seemed quieter between them. Daniel walked at his father's side, not rushing, matching his pace. They passed a window where their reflection appeared. The older man, with the weathered face and the deep purple metal. The younger man with the same set to his jaw. Two generations linked not just by blood, but by the unspoken understanding of what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, and to stand one's ground when it mattered. As they reached the mall's main exit, the glass doors opened automatically, letting in the cool breath of late afternoon. The sky outside was painted in warm streaks of orange and pink. Walter stepped through first, the light catching his metal one more time before they moved into the open air. The words came then, not from either of them, but in the steady voice of the story itself, a truth that needed no argument. A metal is never just metal. It's blood, it's memory, it's honor. And when honor is trampled, there will always be someone willing to stand up for it, even in silence.